G'day everybody, my name is Elliot Waters and you are listening to the Dysregulated podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show, feel free to like, subscribe and share it around with your mates. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, you definitely can at elliot.t.waters. Okay, so the big news is I'm still sick. Yes, my immune system has just about given up, I think. 3 weeks now, and I'm still battling some sort of fever or virus or whatever it is, I don't know, but it just will not go away. I've got the antibiotics here, a bit of amoxicillin, which is doing nothing, which means it's probably not bacterial, but you got to give it a go because it just will not leave. I don't know what the story is, but anyway, the show must go on. So as you can imagine, being sick, like I said in the last episode, is difficult, especially for someone with mental health problems, because a lot of the ways to overcome mental distress is to get outside, get exercise and go see people, do positive actions like that. And when you're sick in bed, you just do not have those tools at your disposal. So it's been a very difficult 3 weeks, but we have to keep pushing ahead. But it's been difficult. I've been trying to go to work. I've been still going to work as much as I can, trying to push through, which is probably prolonging this state of unwell. But what can you do? You need money. The bills keep coming in. But the problem is, one of my jobs is at the Cambridge Hotel. Now, if you're not aware of the Cambridge Hotel, it is Newcastle's #1 live music venue. And the problem is, of course, that working at a venue like that, you work late. You don't finish till 3, 4 a.m. So I haven't been able to work at the Cambridge. So my income has halved. So you can imagine the stress that has come because of that. Now, if you do a Google search of what stress does to the immune system, it may explain a little bit as to why this virus will not go. Because stress is not good for the immune system. It's not good at all. So obviously, if you're someone who's baseline levels of stress are quite high, like me, thanks to various anxiety disorders, you can imagine the immune system right off the bat is struggling. And I think it's just about capitulated this time because the anxiety is there, it won't abate, and therefore the virus is just running free. So it's been very, very difficult the last couple of weeks, but hopefully soon we'll wake up one morning and it'll all be over. Wouldn't that be great? I'll tell you what, it makes you appreciate being healthy, that's for sure. Maybe I should improve my diet. Maybe I should improve my sleep habits. I don't know. But hopefully we'll be back on track sooner rather than later so I can get these healthy habits into play, because you just cannot do it. You cannot, change the way that you live life, which is what I'm sort of trying to do. That's the process that's been ongoing for a while now. You can't really do those big changes when your body's fighting itself like it is for me right now. So anyway, the sickness persists. It's not COVID. I've done many rat tests. It's definitely not COVID, but it's definitely something, and it's making life more challenging than I really would like it to be at present. And as a result, I've slipped into a bit of a depressive sort of episode as well, and that makes sense because if you're not empowered and able to do the things that you need to do, not only is that stressful, it's actually depressing because you feel like you're treading water and not really going anywhere, and that's not a good thought either. So it's been a real double whammy, the whole anxiety, depression sort of thing flaring up as well in line with this virus. But, what can you do? You just got to hope that it goes sooner rather than later. Try and be as healthy as possible, drink all the water, all that sort of stuff. And hopefully soon we'll be back on track that we can get stuck into getting some of those healthy habits at play. That would be nice. And another complication related to finances and the fact that my income has diminished as a result of my incapability to work like I normally would, which means we haven't been able to go to the psychologist because, in Australia, psychology, to see a clinical psychologist is about $230. And $230 is a lot of money, especially for someone like me that works, 2 sort of part-time casual jobs at the moment. So we haven't been able to go to the psychologist either, and that just makes it worse. But during the week, I was able to have an appointment with my psychiatrist. So you may remember recently I was prescribed a new medication called sertraline or Zoloft, which we'll talk about in a little bit of depth in a minute. But most recently, I've now been prescribed a new drug called Lyrica, also known as Pregabalin. So Pregabalin is a medication indicated for the treatment of neuropathic pain and fibromyalgia, and also commonly used for people who have chronic migraines. Now, it is also used off-label for the treatment of anxiety disorders. So after I talk about SSRIs now, we're going to talk a little bit more about Lyrica or Pregabalin and the appointment I had with the psychiatrist. So SSRI, sertraline, also known as Zoloft. You may remember from the last episode that I was recently prescribed it, and this is how it's gone. So remembering, I've been on a few SSRIs before, such as fluoxetine or Prozac and escitalopram Lexapro, with little result. So how has the introduction of sertraline gone? It's been a few weeks now, so let's evaluate it. Well, this time around we started with some nausea, although nothing compared to the nausea I've had associated with SNRI use, such as venlafaxine or Effexor. And we'll talk a bit more about SNRIs in a minute too. But this time around, my biggest problem, and it's been mostly problems, I haven't really had that much benefit that I can tell. My biggest problem and concern this time is daytime sleepiness or somnolence. So for a while I haven't felt the need to sleep during the day, which is good, even though my sleep-wake cycle is still a bit out of whack, although it is improving. But a return to an SSRI has brought this need for daytime naps back, I think. All right, so let's look at the research. The Psychiatric Times reports, because of the complexity of serotonin involvement in sleep-wake regulation, drugs that modulate serotonin activity can produce prominent and sometimes diverse effects on sleep. Some patients who took fluoxetine reported insomnia as an adverse effect, whereas other patients experienced daytime somnolence. This same pattern of diverse subjective reports on sleep and wakefulness has been reported in clinical trials with all of the drugs in this class, which includes sertraline. So this is interesting. So during last year, whilst dragging myself to the finish line of my honours degree in psychology, somnolence, which is daytime sleepiness, was a key feature of my presentation. At the time, I put it down to my lingering depression and in particular the extreme anxiety I'd been dealing with on a daily basis. Of course, anxiety heightens adrenaline, which produces the flight or fight or freeze response, freeze in my case. So you get high heart rates, sweating, shaking hands, and your mind is working in overdrive, but you're not really going anywhere with it. So that's the sympathetic nervous system being put in overdrive, and physiologically it is very taxing on the individual. Always in this hyper-aroused state, very taxing. So naturally it would be expected that prolonged periods of such a state would require an extended rest period, which I attributed to my daytime naps, which I think makes sense, which became all the more common as the year went on. Now, I'm not talking here about just a quick 30-minute nap, we're not just resting our eyes. We're talking, I would wake up, for example, around 10 a.m. in the morning after getting to sleep at 1, 2 a.m. from studying through the night. Then by 12:30, 1 o'clock lunchtime, I'd be back in bed and would sleep, aided admittedly by antipsychotic medications like quetiapine or olanzapine, which are very sedating, and I would sleep for 2 to 4 hours. Then the big night shift study effort would begin. I always do my best work at night, unfortunately. And during these waking hours, I would be stressed to the max. And it got so bad that sleep wasn't even an escape, as I would vividly dream about all the things I had to get done. And I still do that today. So restful sleep was hard to come by as well. I also put down my somnolence to the medication lithium. Now, we may remember lithium is prescribed for those with bipolar disorder, such as myself, although I'm not on it anymore, to control those fluctuations in mood. Also during this time, importantly, I was on escitalopram or Lexapro, among many other medications, but I didn't really make the link between Lexapro and somnolence until now. I was certain it was the lithium to blame. So I blamed the lithium for my extra need to sleep, as I thought it was exasperating my depression and anxiety, which isn't what it's meant to do, but it felt like it was doing it to me. So it was good at keeping my mood stable, but it pinned my mood down too low. Needless to say, there was no manic or hypomanic episodes during this period of time, unfortunately, because if there was, I probably would have smashed out my thesis in a night. And really, in fact, there was very little positive emotion at all. But in reflection, maybe it wasn't the lithium after all, even if it did make my mood overall worse, which I still think it did. But as far as somnolence go, it may have been the Lexapro pulling the need for sleep levers. Interesting. So another antidepressant I've been on, which you may remember from past episodes, which I'm now not on again, is bupropion or Wellbutrin, which is a bit different as it's an NDRI, so a norepinephrine and dopamine reuptake inhibitor. Very little effect on serotonin. It is far more activating, and I didn't have these sleep problems when I was on it. So more evidence that serotonin may be implicated in my daytime sleepiness and lack of energy problems. So we can just about rule out norepinephrine, dopamine, and medications that act on these neural pathways, as they're not known to produce somnolence generally speaking, although everyone is different, and didn't appear to do so with me. Quite the opposite, in fact. Very activating. Of note, and this is also important, is that stimulant medications like dexamphetamine, Ritalin, or Vyvanse, Vyvanse is what I'm on currently for my ADHD, do their work with norepinephrine and dopamine and rarely cause somnolence, hence why they're stimulants. So SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, like sertraline, work by stopping the reabsorption of serotonin at the neuronal level. So between the neurons in the brain at the synaptic cleft, there is more serotonin floating around, and this is thought to alleviate symptoms of depression and anxiety. Serotonin is also implicated in sleep. It is a precursor to melatonin, which many have probably heard of, which is a critical hormone in getting one to fall asleep. But it is a bit more complicated than that. Serotonin, especially when artificially inflated by SSRIs, can reduce REM sleep, that's rapid eye movement sleep. It can induce sleep via its direct mechanism of action, increasing serotonin along with melatonin, or it can keep you awake. So it has a large bearing on one's sleep architecture either way. Something I might add that doctors don't really tell you. In my case, they seem to cause me to sleep more. So some people will find they sleep less on SSRIs, and like I said before, and the research I read out before, some people will get somnolence. It all depends on how you are wired. So how does this happen? Well, we're not entirely sure. Maybe it's because serotonin, in my case, is trying to get me to fall asleep. Perhaps it is because when I am asleep at night, it plays havoc on my sleep architecture and I don't have good quality sleep, which of course causes one to be sleepy during the day. Not particularly sure. I don't really have an opinion either way of which way the serotonin is affecting my sleep, but I think it is certainly doing something. So let's go back to the literature and look at a case study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health by Harrell and colleagues. This paper focused on an individual who was on sertraline like me, but for a much longer period, and this is what they found, and I quote, "A 16-year-old depressed adolescent who had received sertraline treatment for the previous 18 months developed insomnia, daytime somnolence, and a lack of energy. His thyroid tests revealed low levels of total T4, with normal levels of free T4 and TSH, and a normal TRH stimulation test. Discontinuing sertraline resulted in improved sleep and disappearance of daytime somnolence. Although daytime somnolence and low levels of total T4 can mimic hypothyroidism, in this case, sertraline only displaced the bound fraction of total T4 and was not associated with true hypothyroidism." So very briefly, the thyroid produces hormones which regulate many different functions, such as metabolic rate and, of importance here, sleep and energy. So maybe the sertraline is indirectly affecting my energy levels via the thyroid gland. Not sure. But I can confirm that the sertraline is definitely doing something as far as my sleep goes. For a little bit there, for a couple of days, I actually stopped using the sertraline, obviously not at the behest of my doctors, but I did it anyway. And my somnolence problem dissipated for the most part, yet the anxiety remained. So maybe it isn't the heightened arousal state as induced by anxiety that was the blame. It is the serotonin and the effects of SSRIs. But because I've been sick, and as I said, I've gone into a bit of a depressive state, and the anxiety is certainly still sticking around. I have started using sertraline again, and it is a bit hard at the moment to tell if my daytime sleepiness is caused by the sertraline or being sick. So we will wait until I'm healthy to reevaluate that situation. So let's go back to lithium. So I've been off lithium for about 3 months now, and although I initially blamed it for a lot of my woes, I did. Poor old lithium got a lot of the blame. It is becoming clearer that its effects on somnolence may have been overstated. It is the introduction of another SSRI that seems to have the most bearing on this. Of note is that I now don't believe it made my anxiety any worse, that's the lithium, as evidenced by the fact the needle didn't change much either way when comparing symptoms on lithium versus when off it. But on the other hand, I am feeling, or I was before I got sick, a little bit more positive emotion, which is good, but the mood fluctuations have returned, although not as severe as they have been in the past. That's a good thing, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Unfortunately, nothing is ever simple or linear when it comes to mental illness, or at least it isn't for me. But to make it more confusing, if it is indeed the SSRI causing this, is it actually the serotonin influence that is causing it? Somnolence is a key symptom for many with depression. SSRIs in the interim tend to make depression worse, not always, but for a lot of people, it does get worse before it gets better. One of the side effects of SSRIs in the short term is an increase in suicidal ideation and suicide risk, which is also something that isn't necessarily told to you by your doctors. So is it the change in serotonin at the synaptic cleft that is causing this daytime sleepiness problem, or is it a result of a worsening depression? I suppose we will find out, because I'm going to stick with it a bit longer, and let's assume that my depression does lift a bit. Will the sleep problem go away with it? That's the question. Is somnolence, in my case, a direct result of altered brain chemistry from the sertraline, or is it an indirect effect of the medication causing, in the short term, depression to get worse before it gets better? So that is the question. But I'll tell you what, we need to find out soon, and this is why. Because I just do not have the appetite to engage with much more trial and error. Let's use COVID restrictions as an example. At least here in Australia, the general public is not willing to lock down or impose heavy restrictions again, it seems. The populace is burnt out by the previous measures. I am like the general Australian population, which makes sense because I am. I'm not willing to use trial and error and be locked down, if you will, by new medications that may or may not work. I need to know that if we're going to go through worsening depressions and anxiety, that we're going to come out the other side feeling better. Because we've been doing this trial and error sort of stuff for the last 16 years. So at any point, if major symptoms start to get worse or return with vigor, I can see myself jumping off the medication. So once the somnolence returned, my first thought was, see you later, sertraline. It also doesn't help that I've run out of my stimulant medication, Vyvanse. As I said, stimulant medications tend to counteract somnolence pretty well, but I don't have any left, so that's a problem until my script is renewed in a week or two. But it's true. I am very wary and risk adverse when it comes to SSRIs and side effects, because I've been through this before. The nausea I can handle, which I said earlier that I've been dealing with. But I cannot go back to the days of laying in bed again, although I am at the moment because of being sick. But if we're not sick and we're theoretically healthy physically, there's no reason why I should have to be sleeping in bed all day like I used to do. Because this has a big effect on my quality of life. And I wouldn't say my quality of life at the moment is amazing, obviously. That's sort of the theme of this podcast. But I have managed to figure out a way to be mostly functional, sort of, and still get up and get some things done each day, mostly. So maybe I'm just getting used to this way of living, sort of holding on for dear life and doing the bare minimum, but still getting by. But either way, I cannot bear the idea of regressing any further and compromising my quality of life anymore, even if it is theoretically over for the short term. Because my experience with these antidepressants have been anything but confidence-inducing. So what other options are there? Well, fluoxetine or Prozac is viewed as the most activating of the SSRIs. Perhaps that's worth investigating. Of course, though, I've had fluoxetine before, and that was right at the start of this story many, many years ago. And I can't really remember how it went, to be honest, except that it couldn't have been the amazing fix-it-all pill that I was hoping for, because I did go off it after all. Now, SNRIs, remember, these are serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, so it's working on norepinephrine as well as serotonin, have been trialled with me before, and although they did seem to work with my rumination, that constant negative thinking, my depressive symptoms as well, these medications, the two I've tried, venlafaxine and desvenlafaxine, made my anxiety a lot worse, which I think is because of the work on the norepinephrine, which is also called noradrenaline. So remember, adrenaline is heavily implicated in anxiety in the flight or fight response. But I didn't have somnolence from them, from what I can remember. So again, stuck between a rock and a hard place here. Maybe duloxetine or Cymbalta could be trialled. It's another SNRI, and that is a popular choice from what I've heard that I haven't used before. So anyway, that is the story with sertraline. But that's not where the medication story for this week ends. So I've weaned myself off successfully of quetiapine or Seroquel, which is good. Good news. So my dosage of it was pretty low, or my prescribed dosage was pretty low at 100 milligrams, and was really only efficacious to help me fall asleep. Now, the other antipsychotic I'm on, olanzapine, I've found to work better at calming the mind down, which is good. It's actually doing something for, my anxiety and depression. That's good. And it must be noted that any antipsychotic comes with an array of possible side effects, and it's not usually recommended, from what I've read in the literature, to be on two at the same time. So quetiapine or Seroquel is known to cause, potentially, a condition called tardive dyskinesia, where an individual can do repetitive facial movements, lip smacking, and more. Olanzapine is known to potentially cause metabolic changes, and at its worst, and this isn't as uncommon as you would hope, diabetes. And if you put them together, as far as my research goes, is not a good idea. So the question remains, why really have I been prescribed both? But anyway, not much evidence is found, like I said, that suggests combining antipsychotic medication brings about any significant positive effects over just having one. So looking at both and the side effect profiles and the actual effects on my mental health sort of state and outcomes, olanzapine wins this battle. But there's a lot of side effects attributed to antipsychotic medication. We're going to do an episode purely on that because it's very important, I think, that people know the potential downsides, because antipsychotics are very regularly now prescribed for people with sleep problems, even if they don't have mental health problems, because they are very, very sedating, working on the histamine receptors in the brain. But anyway, I'll talk more about that in another episode. So, olanzapine, I do like it a lot more for me personally. It has a much longer half-life than quetiapine, so it only needs to be dosed once daily, and it has proven efficacy when combined with fluoxetine to help depression. So some evidence suggests it works very well with all SSRIs for depression, something quetiapine just doesn't really have the research around it. But since bumping up my dosage of olanzapine, I have put on a little bit of weight. There's the metabolic changes that I need to watch. Now, don't get me wrong, I could afford to put on a few kilos, that's for sure. I'm always trying to bulk in the gym, but it's a bit of a concern when my activity levels and dietary intake hasn't changed prior, at least, to me getting sick. So I did find that I was gaining weight before I got sick, and I can only really attribute it to the olanzapine, so that needs to be monitored. Okay, so to finish up, back to Lyrica or Pregabalin. So I had my appointment with the psychiatrist, and he asked me how my anxiety and depression was going, and I explained that both weren't going particularly well, and he did ask if you had to pick one, which is coming first? Is it the anxiety, then the depression as like a symptom of the anxiety, a secondary effect? Or is it the depression and then the anxiety coming on as a secondary effect? And I said, no, It's the anxiety that is underlining all of this, as it generally has for the last 16 years, and it's the depression coming second. I think the depression is being caused by the fact that, like I said, I'm unable to do the things I know I need to do to, improve my quality of life for whatever reason, and I'm getting very anxious over that thought, and then I'm getting depressed at the fact that I can't do it. And a lot of the reason why I'm not able to get these things done, to get these new habits formed, is because of the anxiety causing that freeze effect, which plagued me throughout my degree, but it's plagued me throughout my life, really. So, I've said this before, but I'll say it again, some people go into fight or flight, some people freeze. So instead of me going out there in the scary big wide world and getting the things done I need to do, I'm extremely anxious and I just freeze and stay in my room and just ruminate on the fact that I can't get out there and do what I need to do. So the anxiety is the one that's putting the brakes on. And because the brakes are on and I don't feel like I have the capacity to take the handbrake off, that is causing me to be depressed. So my psychiatrist said if it was the depression coming first, we would bump up the dosage of the sertraline. But because it's the anxiety, we've introduced Pregabalin. So like I said, Pregabalin is used off-label for anxiety, and it works similar to benzodiazepines, such as Valium. So what it does, it works on GABA receptors. And again, I'm going to do an episode on Pregabalin and its use in mental health, and I'll explain this more, but it works on GABA. So GABA is gamma-aminobutyric acid, and it plays a function in the brain. So what Pregabalin does is increase the levels of GABA, which can induce euphoria and relaxation. And it does have some downsides. It can be addictive, and it works very much like benzodiazepines, like I said, which have a very well-known addictive quality to them. So basically, what Pregabalin does, it relaxes somebody. See, alcohol works on GABA as well. It sort of feels a little bit like not completely being drunk, because you can still function and do things, but it certainly slows everything down and gives you that bit of euphoria and that relaxation. So in some ways it is similar to alcohol, definitely, but it is not quite as disinhibiting maybe as alcohol, but it certainly has similar effects, I feel. And as a result, it lowers anxiety levels. But I've been prescribed a very low dose, and to be honest, this low dose doesn't really do much. I think it's more to see if I tolerate it, which so far I have. But I am happy with the introduction of Lyrica. During my degree, I actually suggested to my psychiatrist that it might be an option, and he, quite rightly now in hindsight looking back, suggested that it wasn't a good idea then, because I needed to be sharp and focused on my degree, and Pregabalin, because it is relaxing, can make it difficult to do things like study, because really all you want to do is chill out and relax. But it is helpful. I've used it before, and it is very helpful in getting, for example, me out of my room and out into the big wide world, and, doing simple things like grocery shopping, filling up the car, stuff like that, going to work. So, the introduction of Lyrica, I think, is a good idea. I think Pregabalin is definitely going to be a part of my story moving forward. It does have addictive qualities for sure, but not quite as bad as benzodiazepines according to the research, so it is a safer option, even though it works in a similar manner. So anyway, that is the latest from me. We're still sick, but we're still pushing on as best we can. That was a very difficult episode to get out. Thank you as always, for listening. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. I did check the other day. I have a 5-star rating on both Apple and Spotify. So thank you very much for the support. I really do appreciate that. And thank you for listening. We got through that episode. That was a tough one, I tell you what, to get out, but we got there. Resilience is key. Is a key feature of this podcast, that's for sure. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you soon, and we'll see how my journey with Lyrica is going and if my daytime sleepiness resolves itself. And hopefully the next episode I put out, I'll be back to my best, nice and healthy again. So as always, thank you for supporting the show, and I will see you next time here on the Dysregulated podcast.